The assembly hall stretched so far that Jake Morrison could barely see the end of it. Thousands of alien beings filled the curved rows of seats that rose like a massive wave around the central platform where he stood. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime as hundreds of languages merged into one comprehensible stream. Beside him stood Linda Hayes, her hands clasped behind her back, her face showing no emotion even though Jake knew she must be as nervous as he was. They were the only two humans in a room filled with creatures that had decided humanity's fate before this trial ever began. The Speaker of the Council rose from the highest seat in the chamber. His name was impossible for human tongues to pronounce, so everyone just called him the Speaker. He was tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like oil on water and eyes that had no pupils. When he spoke, his voice came through the translation device cold and final. "We have reviewed the evidence presented by Earth's representatives. We have considered your arguments and your pleas. The Council has made its decision." Jake felt his jaw tighten. He had spent 3 months traveling to this station at the edge of Council space. 3 months preparing speeches and evidence and diplomatic responses. 3 months hoping that somehow he could change minds that were already made up. The Council had been watching humanity for 50 years, ever since humans developed faster than light travel and stumbled into galactic society like children wandering into an adult conversation. They had watched with suspicion and fear as humanity spread across their local systems, building colonies and fleets with a speed that made other species uncomfortable. The species known as humanity is hereby declared unsuitable for membership in the Galactic Council, the Speaker continued. Furthermore, all human presence in Council space is banned effective 30 days from this moment. All trade agreements are void. All diplomatic relations are severed. Any human found in Council territory after the grace period expires will be arrested and prosecuted according to Council law. Linda's hand found Jake's arm and squeezed. He knew she wanted him to stay quiet, to accept this with dignity, but anger burned in his chest like a furnace. "You can't do this," he said, his voice echoing across the vast chamber. "We've followed every rule. We've proven ourselves peaceful. We've contributed technology and knowledge. What more do you want from us?" The Speaker's eyes focused on Jake with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. "Captain Morrison, your species has existed in space for barely half a century. In that time, you have fought 3 wars among yourselves, expanded into territory without proper surveys, and developed weapons technology at a rate that terrifies every peaceful species in this chamber. You're aggressive, unpredictable, and dangerous. The Council cannot and will not accept such risk into our society." "We ended those wars," Linda said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm but firm. "We learned from them. Humanity has been at peace for 20 years now. Our expansion follows every guideline you gave us. Our weapons are for defense only." "Defense?" another Council member said, rising from his seat. He was short and wide, covered in blue fur that bristled as he spoke. "You call warships that can destroy planets defensive? You call armies that train constantly for combat peaceful? Your species cannot help itself. Violence is coded into your very nature." "Every species here has weapons," Jake shot back. "Every species here has armies." "Why are we different?" "Because you are young and foolish," the blue-furred alien said. "Because you do not understand the delicate balance that keeps our galaxy peaceful. Because you will drag us all into chaos if given the chance." The Speaker raised one long hand and the chamber fell silent. "The decision is final. Humanity is outlawed from Council space. You have 30 days to remove all your people, your ships, and your installations from any system under Council jurisdiction. After that time, any human presence will be considered an act of war." Jake wanted to argue more, wanted to shout and demand justice, but Linda's grip on his arm tightened. She was right. There was nothing more they could do here. The Council had made up their minds long before this hearing began. This whole spectacle was just theater, a way for them to feel righteous about condemning an entire species to isolation. They turned and walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Jake could feel thousands of alien eyes watching them go. Some looked satisfied, others looked uncomfortable, but none looked willing to stand up and say this was wrong. The great doors of the assembly hall sealed behind them with a hiss that sounded like finality itself. The corridor outside was empty, except for their security escort. 2 humans in dress uniforms who had waited patiently for hours. "Sir," one of them said quietly, "the ship is ready when you are." Jake nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't trust his voice yet. The walk to the docking bay felt longer than it should have. Every corner they turned revealed more of the massive station that served as the Council's headquarters. Thousands of species lived and worked here in harmony, or so they claimed. Now humanity would never be part of that harmony. Their ship was small compared to the massive vessels docked nearby. But it was fast, and it was home. The crew stood at attention as Jake and Linda boarded, their faces full of questions they were too disciplined to ask. Linda went straight to her quarters without a word. Jake made his way to the bridge and dropped into the captain's chair. "Set course for Earth," he said to the pilot. "Maximum speed." "Yes, sir," the pilot replied. "Sir, did they really ban us?" Jake looked out at the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there was Earth, humanity's homeworld, now cut off from the rest of the galaxy by decree of species that called themselves civilized. "Yes," he said. "They really did." The ship pulled away from the station and jumped to faster than light speed. Behind them, the Council congratulated itself on containing a dangerous threat. Ahead of them, Earth waited to hear that everything humanity had worked for was gone. Jake closed his eyes and tried to think of what he would say to the billions of people who had hoped this meeting would go differently. He had no idea that this moment, this rejection, would become the catalyst for humanity's greatest achievement. The Council thought they had buried humanity. They didn't know they had just planted seeds that would grow into something they could never have imagined. Eric Stone watched the countdown clock on his display and felt his stomach twist into knots. 23 days remained until every human in Council space became a criminal. His job was to make sure that didn't happen, but the numbers weren't looking good. There were human colonies on 14 worlds in Council territory, research stations on 6 more, trading outposts scattered across 50 systems, and independent ships too numerous to count. Getting them all home in time would take a miracle, and Eric had stopped believing in miracles around the same time the Council declared his entire species unwelcome. The communication console in front of him lit up with another incoming message. He didn't want to read it, but he had no choice. The message was from Colony 7, one of the furthest human settlements in Council space. They needed more transport ships. They had 20,000 people, and only enough vessels to move half of them before the deadline. Eric closed his eyes and added it to the list of problems he couldn't solve. "Commander Stone," his assistant called from across the operations center, "we have another situation. The transport convoy heading to Station 12 is being detained by Council patrols. They're saying we violated some regulation about flight paths. They're making up rules as they go," Eric muttered. He opened a channel to the convoy leader. "This is Stone. Find another route. Don't argue with them. Don't give them any excuse to delay you further. Just get to Station 12 and get those people out." While Eric coordinated the massive evacuation effort, President Helen Carter stood before the United Earth Assembly trying to hold civilization together. The assembly hall in Geneva was packed beyond capacity. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every faction within humanity had gathered to hear what their leader would say about the greatest crisis their species had ever faced. Helen looked out at the sea of worried faces and knew that her next words would define humanity's future. She could give them despair or she could give them hope. The choice seemed obvious, but the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. "The Galactic Council has rejected us," she began, her voice steady despite the fear she felt inside. "They have declared us too dangerous, too aggressive, too unpredictable to join their society. They have given us 30 days to leave their territory, or face arrest and imprisonment." The assembly erupted in angry shouts and accusations. Some demanded war. Others demanded submission. Still others demanded isolation. Helen waited for the noise to die down before she continued. "I did not come here to discuss revenge or surrender. I came here to talk about opportunity." That got their attention. The hall fell silent as thousands of eyes focused on her. "The Council thinks they have contained us," Helen said. "They think by cutting us off from their space, they have limited our growth and our future. They are wrong. For 50 years, we have tried to fit into their mold, to follow their rules, to prove we deserve a seat at their table. We have wasted time and resources trying to become something we are not. That ends today." She pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy that rotated slowly above the assembly floor. "This is Council space," she said, highlighting a large section in blue. "And this," she added, highlighting an even larger section in gold, is unexplored space in the opposite direction. The Council has been so focused on maintaining their territory that they have ignored entire regions of the galaxy. They think this ban is a punishment. I say it is liberation. We will no longer waste our energy seeking their approval. Instead, we will expand into territory they have never claimed, discover worlds they have never seen, and build a civilization on our own terms. The assembly sat in stunned silence. Then slowly, one by one, people began to stand and applaud. The sound grew until it filled the hall like thunder. Helen allowed herself a small smile. It was a start. In a laboratory deep beneath Earth's surface, Paul Bennett studied the prototype engine that might make the president's vision possible. He was Earth's chief engineer, and he had been working on this project in secret for 3 years. The Council restricted faster-than-light technology, only allowing member species access to approved designs that were slow and inefficient. They claimed it was for safety, but Paul knew the truth. They wanted to control who could travel where and how fast they could do it. Paul's engine threw those restrictions away. It used principles the Council said were impossible, drawing power from quantum fluctuations in space itself. The prototype was crude and unstable, but if he could refine it, humanity would have drives faster than anything the Council possessed. "Show me the test results again," he said to his assistant Karen White. Karen pulled up the data on a nearby screen. She was a xenobiologist by training, but she had been helping Paul with the theoretical framework for his engine. "The energy output is stable for 18 minutes before the cascade begins," she explained. "If we can extend that to an hour, we'll have something workable. And if we can't?" Paul asked. Karen smiled. "Then we keep trying. That's what humans do, right? We keep trying until we succeed." By the end of the first week, Eric had managed to evacuate 60% of the human population from Council space. It wasn't enough. There were still hundreds of thousands of people scattered across dozens of systems, and time was running out. Some colonies made the difficult decision to stay behind, hoping they could hide from Council authorities or appeal to local species for protection. Eric tried to talk them out of it, but he understood. These people had built lives in Council territory. They had homes, businesses, families rooted in alien soil. Asking them to abandon everything with no guarantee of a future was asking the impossible. On Earth, massive colony ships were being prepared for launch. These weren't exploration vessels like humanity had built before. These were arcs, massive structures capable of carrying millions of people and everything they would need to start new civilizations in unexplored space. The construction yards worked around the clock, building faster than anyone thought possible. Engineers who had never met before worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques without hesitation. This was humanity at its best, unified by a common cause. Jake Morrison, newly promoted to admiral, oversaw the fortification of Earth's borders. If they were going to be cut off from Council space, they needed to make sure no one could use that as an opportunity to attack. Defense platforms were deployed at every major entry point to human territory. Patrol routes were established. Communication networks were hardened against interference. Jake didn't think the Council would attack, but he hadn't thought they would ban humanity either. Better to be prepared. On the final day of the grace period, the last transport ships crossed from Council space into human territory. They brought with them stories of harassment and delay, of Council species celebrating humanity's departure, of confusion and fear about what came next. Eric Stone watched them arrive and felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't saved everyone, but he had saved most of them. It would have to be enough. That same day, the first colony ships launched toward the Galactic Rim. President Helen Carter stood at the observation deck and watched them go, brilliant streaks of light disappearing into the darkness. Beside her stood Paul Bennett and Karen White, both exhausted from weeks of non-stop work but energized by what they were witnessing. "They think we'll fail," Helen said quietly. "They think isolation will break us," Paul grinned. "Then they really don't know humans at all." 20 years had passed since the Council banned humanity from their space, and Jake Morrison barely recognized the galaxy anymore. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, now an admiral commanding a fleet that would have seemed impossible 2 decades ago. Through the viewport, he could see the construction yards of New Haven, humanity's largest colony beyond Earth. Dozens of ships were being built simultaneously, their skeletal frames gleaming under the light of 3 suns. This single system produced more vessels in a month than Earth had built in its first decade of space travel. "Admiral, we have incoming traffic from the Valurian delegation," his communications officer reported. "They're requesting permission to dock." Jake nodded. "Grant them clearance. Send word to Ambassador Dixon that her guests have arrived." The Valurians were one of many species humanity had encountered in unexplored space. The Council had never bothered to contact them, considering them too primitive to be worth the effort. Humanity had taken a different approach. Every species they met was treated as a potential friend and equal, regardless of their technology level. It was a philosophy born partly from idealism and partly from necessity. When you're banned from the established order, you build a new one with whoever will stand beside you. Gregory Scott was working in his laboratory when the alert came through. He was so focused on his calculations that he almost missed it entirely. His assistant had to physically shake his shoulder to get his attention. "Dr. Scott, the test is ready." Gregory looked up from his equations and blinked. "Already? I thought we needed another week." "The engineering team worked through the night," his assistant explained. "They want to run the test before the Council observers arrive in the sector." Gregory felt a surge of excitement. For 5 years he had been developing a new faster-than-light drive, based on principles that the Council insisted were impossible. The Council ships could travel at speeds humanity had once thought miraculous. But Gregory's prototype could go faster. Much faster. If the test succeeded, humanity would have the ability to cross the galaxy in weeks instead of months. "All right," he said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "Let's see if we just revolutionized space travel." The test vessel was small, barely large enough for a crew of 3. It hung in space a safe distance from any inhabited systems, surrounded by monitoring stations that would track every second of its journey. Gregory watched from the main control station as the crew completed their pre-flight checks. His hands were sweating. Years of work came down to this single moment. "All systems green," the pilot reported. "Drive charging to full power. Initiating jump in 10 seconds. Gregory held his breath. The ship vanished from normal space and reappeared 30 light-years away in less than a minute. The monitoring stations erupted in celebration. The crew was cheering over the communication channel. Gregory just smiled and went back to his equations. They could go faster still. Lisa Morgan had a different approach to advancing humanity. While Gregory pushed the boundaries of physics, she focused on practical engineering. Her self-replicating construction systems could take raw materials from asteroids and turn them into functioning space stations without human supervision. It was technology the Council would have banned as too dangerous, too unpredictable. Lisa didn't care what the Council thought anymore. She stood in the command center of Construction Platform 7 and watched her machines work. They moved with purpose and efficiency, each unit coordinating with thousands of others to build something that would have taken human workers years to complete. In 3 months, this platform had constructed a station capable of housing 50,000 people. In 6 months it would be finished and another platform would move on to the next project. "The Council is going to panic when they find out about this," her deputy said, watching the construction drones swarm over the growing structure. Lisa shrugged. "Let them panic. They had their chance to work with us. They chose isolation instead." News of humanity's expansion was reaching Council space through independent traders and curious explorers. The reports were dismissed at first as exaggeration or propaganda. Humans couldn't possibly have developed such advanced technology in just 20 years. Their colonies couldn't possibly be thriving in regions the Council considered worthless. Their fleet couldn't possibly rival those of established Council members. But the reports kept coming. And eventually even the most skeptical Council members had to admit that something unexpected was happening. Claire, Dixon had become humanity's most successful diplomat without ever setting foot in Council space. She specialized in first contact with species the Council had ignored or never found. Her approach was simple and direct. She offered friendship, trade, and protection without demanding submission or tribute in return. Species that had spent centuries being exploited by Council affiliates found the human approach refreshing. The Valurians were her greatest success story. They were a peaceful species that had been driven from their homeworld by pirates operating out of Council territory. For decades they had lived as refugees, scattered across a dozen poor systems hoping someday to reclaim what they had lost. Claire had listened to their story and made them a promise. Humanity would help them take back their world. It took 6 months of planning and another 3 months of fighting. But human ships drove the pirates away and helped the Valyrians establish a defense network that would keep them safe. The Valyrians never forgot it. They became humanity's strongest allies and advocates, spreading word throughout unexplored space that humans kept their promises. The network of human colonies and allied species grew rapidly. They called themselves the Free Systems Compact, a loose alliance based on mutual defense and open trade. There were no complicated membership requirements or bureaucratic hierarchies. If you wanted to join, you joined. If you wanted to leave, you left. It was everything the Council wasn't, and species flocked to it. Jake watched it all happen from his position in the fleet. He had gone from being a disgraced captain representing a banned species to an admiral commanding forces that made Council members nervous. The irony wasn't lost on him. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Council space," his communications officer said. "It's on a secure channel marked urgent," Jake frowned. Humanity had no official contact with the Council. Any communication would be highly unusual. "Put it through to my ready room. I'll take it privately." The face that appeared on his screen belonged to a Zreth, one of the Council's military commanders. Jake had met him briefly during the trial 20 years ago. "Admiral Morrison," the Zreth said without preamble, "I am contacting you against the wishes of my government. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." "I'm listening," Jake said carefully. "There is a threat emerging from deep space. We call them the Devourers. They are a machine intelligence that consumes entire star systems for raw materials. They have already destroyed 3 Council worlds. Our forces cannot stop them." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. "What do you want from us?" "Help," the Zreth said simply. "The Council will not officially ask. Their pride will not allow it. But if the Devourers are not stopped, they will eventually reach human space as well. This is not just our problem. It is everyone's problem." Jake sat back in his chair and thought about everything the Council had done to humanity. The ban, the humiliation, the forced evacuation. Part of him wanted to tell the Zreth that the Council could solve their own problems. But he thought about the millions of innocent beings living on Council worlds who had nothing to do with their government's decisions. He thought about the Valyrians and all the other species humanity had befriended. He thought about what kind of civilization humanity wanted to be. "I'll need to discuss this with Earth," Jake said finally, "but you should know that if humanity helps, it won't be as your subordinates. It will be as equals." The Zreth nodded slowly. "I understand." "That is more than I expected." "Thank you, Admiral." The transmission ended and Jake sat alone in his ready room staring at the stars. 20 years ago, the Council had tried to bury humanity. Now they were asking for help. The galaxy had changed more than anyone could have predicted, and the biggest changes were still to come. The debate in the Free Systems Compact Council chamber had been going on for 6 hours and showed no signs of ending. Ryan Foster slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make everyone jump. "They threw us out like garbage," he shouted. "They called us dangerous and unpredictable and too violent to exist in their precious civilization. Now they want our help. Let them burn." Across the table, Linda Hayes remained calm despite the anger in the room. She had aged in the 20 years since the trial, her hair now gray and her face lined with the weight of countless decisions. But her eyes were still sharp and her voice still carried authority. "I understand your anger, Captain Foster. I feel it too. But this isn't about revenge. It's about survival. If the Devourers consume Council space, they won't stop at our border. They'll keep coming until they've consumed everything. Then we fight them when they reach us," Ryan shot back. "Why should we waste our resources defending people who hate us?" "Because that's what separates us from them," Linda said quietly. "The Council judged us without really knowing us. They decided we were monsters based on fear and prejudice. If we let innocent people die because of what their government did, then maybe they were right about us all along." The room fell silent. Jake Morrison, sitting at the head of the table, looked around at the faces of his fellow leaders. Some showed agreement with Ryan's anger. Others showed reluctance to abandon people in need. This was the moment that would define what humanity and their allies stood for. "We put it to a vote," Jake said. "All in favor of offering assistance to Council space against the Devourers, raise your hand." The vote was close, but it passed. Ryan Foster stormed out of the chamber without another word. Jake didn't blame him. The decision hurt, but it was the right one. "Contact the Council," Jake told his aide. "Tell them we'll help, but on our terms. We come as equals or we don't come at all. The council's response took 3 days. When it finally came, it was grudging and filled with conditions and demands. Jake read through the message and deleted it. He sent his own response that was much simpler. Accept our help as offered or face the devourers alone. You have 12 hours to decide. The council accepted with 2 hours to spare. Kevin Brooks arrived in council space with the largest engineering team humanity had ever assembled. His job was to upgrade council defense networks with human technology, which meant working directly with council engineers who still considered humans inferior. The first meeting was tense. The lead council engineer, a being with 4 arms and skin like polished stone, looked at Kevin's plans with obvious disdain. Your technology is crude and untested. We cannot risk our defense networks on human experiments. Kevin took a deep breath and reminded himself that he was here to save lives, not win arguments. Our technology works. I can prove it if you'll give me a chance. But if you'd rather stick with systems that are already failing against the devourers, that's your choice. The council engineer's skin changed color slightly, which Kevin had learned meant irritation. But after a long pause, the engineer nodded. Show me what you have. For 3 weeks, Kevin and his team worked alongside council engineers, slowly building trust through competence and patience. The council engineers were brilliant but rigid, following procedures and protocols that had been established centuries ago. Kevin's team was flexible and innovative, solving problems in ways the council had never considered. Gradually, the two groups began to learn from each other. Amy Sullivan faced different challenges. She was a doctor tasked with coordinating medical relief for the millions of refugees fleeing from devourer attacks. The refugee camps were overwhelmed, undersupplied, and falling apart. Council medical teams were competent but stretched too thin across too many systems. Amy arrived with human medical supplies and volunteer doctors from a dozen allied species. The council officials running the camps didn't want to let them in at first, citing regulations and security concerns. Amy ignored them and set up her facilities anyway. Within a week, the human medical teams were treating 3 times as many patients as the council teams. Within a month, council doctors were asking Amy for advice and requesting transfers to work with human units. She didn't gloat or point out the irony. She just kept working, kept saving lives, kept proving that humanity belonged here. Nicole Gray commanded the first joint human council military operation in history. Her fleet consisted of 30 human ships and 50 council vessels, all tasked with defending a critical system that the devourers were approaching. The council fleet commander, an experienced officer named Threx, made it clear he expected to be in charge. Nicole made it equally clear that wasn't going to happen. We're partners in this, she told him over a tense video conference. My ships follow my orders, yours follow your orders. We coordinate our strategies together. If you can't accept that, then we're wasting time we don't have. Threx considered this for a long moment. Your species is very difficult, he said finally. Yes, Nicole agreed. But we're also very good at fighting. Let's use that. The battle lasted 18 hours. The devourers came in waves, massive machine constructs that tore through shields and armor like they were paper. Council ships fought with practiced precision, following tactics that had been refined over centuries. Human ships fought with aggressive unpredictability, breaking formation to exploit weaknesses and taking risks that made the council commanders nervous. Together, they were more effective than either could have been alone. The system held. The devourers were pushed back. After the battle, Threx contacted Nicole again. You fight like madness itself, he said. But it works. I have underestimated humanity. Everyone does, Nicole said with a tired smile. We're used to it. The war dragged on for 3 brutal years. More systems fell to the devourers. More refugees fled their homes. More ships were lost in desperate battles against an enemy that seemed endless. But slowly, gradually, the combined forces of humanity and the Council began to turn the tide. Human innovation merged with Council experience to create new weapons and new strategies. Species that had never trusted each other learned to fight side by side. The galaxy discovered that survival mattered more than pride. Jake spent those 3 years coordinating the war effort from New Haven. He watched good people die, watched entire colonies get consumed, watched the devourers push deeper into inhabited space. There were nights when he wondered if they could actually win this war. There were moments when he thought about Ryan Foster's words and wondered if helping the council had been a terrible mistake. But then he would receive reports from Kevin about council engineers, openly praising human technology. He would hear stories from Amy about council doctors and human doctors working together to save lives they couldn't have saved alone. He would see battle recordings of Nicole's fleet fighting in perfect coordination with Threx's forces, and he would remember that this was bigger than old grudges and wounded pride. This was about what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in. Linda found him alone in his office one night staring at casualty reports. "You should rest," she said gently. "You're no good to anyone exhausted." "We've lost 12 ships this week," Jake said without looking up. 12 crews who volunteered to help people that called them monsters 20 years ago. "They didn't volunteer to help the council," Linda said. "They volunteered to help innocent people who didn't deserve to die." "There's a difference," Jake finally looked at her. "Is there?" "Sometimes I'm not sure anymore." "The council was wrong about us," Linda said firmly. "They judged us without understanding us. We're proving them wrong every day. But if we let this war turn us bitter and cruel, then maybe we become what they thought we were. We have to be better than that, Jake. That's the only way this matters." Jake nodded slowly. She was right, as usual. How much longer can we sustain this? "As long as we have to," Linda said. "Humanity doesn't quit. That's what makes us dangerous to people like the council. We don't know when to give up." Outside the window, ships prepared for another deployment. Soldiers from a dozen species trained together. Engineers from human and council backgrounds shared notes and theories. The galaxy was changing, forced by crisis into cooperation that pride and prejudice had prevented. The Devourers had meant to destroy civilization, but instead they had accidentally united it. Jake didn't know if that irony would mean anything in the end, but for now it was enough to keep fighting. Daniel Porter had been working on Project Sentinel for 8 months without sleep breaks longer than 4 hours. The physicist looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in weeks, which was accurate since his laboratory was located deep inside an asteroid facility. Across from him sat Threx, the council military commander who had become an unlikely friend during the long years of war. Together they stared at equations that represented humanity's best hope of ending the conflict with the Devourers. "The quantum linking should work in theory," Daniel said, pointing to a section of calculations that covered an entire wall. "If we can connect defense platforms across multiple systems, we can predict Devourer movements before they happen. The problem is the power requirements. We need energy sources that don't exist yet." Threx studied the equations with his 3 eyes moving independently. "What if we combined your quantum links with our gravitational sensors? Council technology can detect mass displacement across vast distances. Together they might provide the prediction network you need." Daniel sat up straight. "That could work. That could actually work. Why didn't I think of that?" "Because you are human and assume you must solve everything alone," Threx said with what might have been humor. "One thing this war has taught me is that combined thinking produces better results than isolated genius." They worked through the night, human innovation merging with council experience to create something neither could have built alone. By morning they had a working theory. By the end of the week they had a prototype. By the end of the month they had a network of quantum-linked defense platforms that could predict Devourer attacks with 80% accuracy. The turning point came at the Battle of Kessler Prime. Nicole Gray commanded the human fleet while Threx commanded the council forces. Their ships working together with a coordination that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier. The Devourers came in their largest wave yet. Thousands of machine constructs intent on consuming the heavily populated system. But this time the defenders were ready. The Sentinel network predicted their approach vector, allowing the combined fleet to position themselves perfectly. The battle was brutal, but decisive. Human ships used their speed and aggression to strike at weak points identified by council sensors. Council ships used their heavy weapons to punch through Devourer armor weakened by human weapons. For every ship the defenders lost, the Devourers lost 10. For the first time since the war began, the machines retreated instead of fighting to the last unit. "They're running," Nicole said in disbelief as she watched the Devourer fleet withdraw. "I didn't think they could run." "Everything runs when it realizes it cannot win," Threx replied. "We have shown them they cannot win. Now we press the advantage." The Sentinel network expanded rapidly. More platforms were built, more systems were connected, and the prediction accuracy climbed to 90%. The Devourers found themselves unable to mount surprise attacks. Every time they gathered forces for an assault, the defenders were already waiting. Slowly but surely, the machines were pushed back toward the edge of known space. Kevin Brooks worked with Council engineers to track the Devourer retreat to its source. They discovered a massive nexus deep in unexplored space, a structure the size of a moon that appeared to coordinate all Devourer activities. If we can destroy that, we might end this war, Kevin told the Joint Military Command. Jake Morrison studied the tactical data and felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. It's heavily defended. We'll lose a lot of ships trying to reach it. We will lose more if we don't try, Threck said. The Nexus is their brain. Without it, the individual Devourer units will be uncoordinated and easier to defeat. The final assault was launched with the largest combined fleet ever assembled. Human ships, Council vessels, and craft from a dozen allied species all converged on the Nexus. The Devourers fought with desperate ferocity to protect their command center, but they were facing an enemy that had learned to work together. The battle lasted 2 days. Hundreds of ships were lost. Thousands of crew members died. But in the end, the Nexus was destroyed. The remaining Devourer units scattered into deep space, no longer coordinated and no longer a unified threat. Individual machines would be hunted down over the following months, but the war was effectively over. The galaxy had survived. Jake Morrison and Linda Hayes traveled to a neutral station to meet with Council leadership for the first time since the trial 30 years earlier. The speaker who had banned humanity was long dead, replaced by new leaders who had watched humans fight and die to save Council worlds. The meeting room was far smaller than the grand assembly hall where humanity had been judged, and there were no crowds of observers. Just a handful of leaders trying to figure out what came next. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to offer our deepest gratitude, the new speaker said. She was young for a council leader, her skin a deep purple that shimmered in the light. Humanity saved us. We were wrong about your species. We want to formally apologize and invite you to join the council with full membership and all privileges. Jake felt Linda tense beside him. This was what they had wanted 30 years ago, what they had begged for during the trial. Now it was being offered freely, along with an apology. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. We appreciate the apology, Jake said carefully. But we're not interested in council membership? The young speaker looked shocked. I don't understand. Isn't this what humanity wanted? 30 years ago, yes, Linda said. We wanted acceptance. We wanted to prove we deserved a place in galactic society, but you taught us something important when you rejected us. You taught us that we don't need your approval to exist. We built our own society, made our own allies, and created our own future. We did it without your permission, and we'll continue doing it without your approval. But surely after fighting together, after everything we've been through, we can move forward as partners, the speaker said. We can be partners without humanity joining the council, Jake said. The Free Systems Compact will work with the council on issues of mutual interest. We'll maintain trade relationships and coordinate on security matters. But we won't submit to your authority or follow your regulations. The council had its chance to include us as equals. You chose to treat us as inferiors instead. We've moved past needing that validation. Another council member, an elderly diplomat with silver skin, spoke up. Some of our members have suggested that humanity should lead a reformed galactic government. Your innovation and leadership during the war proved your value. Linda smiled but shook her head. We don't want to lead the galaxy. We just want to be free to pursue our own path. The council can continue doing what it does. The Free Systems Compact will do what we do. If those paths align, we'll work together. If they don't, we'll respect each other's choices and maintain peaceful relations. The meeting lasted several more hours, but the core message never changed. Humanity had no interest in joining the council or replacing it. They had built something different, something that worked for them and their allies. The council would have to accept humanity as an independent power or face continued irrelevance. When Jake and Linda returned to New Haven, they found the station celebrating. The war was over. People had survived. The future was uncertain but full of possibility. Helen Carter, now ancient but still sharp, waited for them in the command center. How did they take it? She asked. About as well as could be expected, Linda said. They're confused why we don't want what they're offering. Helen laughed. They still don't understand us. After all this time, they still think we want to be like them. That's the fundamental problem. They can't imagine a species that doesn't want what they have. Jake looked out at the stars, at the ships moving between stations, at the evidence of humanity's growth and success. The Free Systems Compact has grown to include 47 species. More are requesting membership every month. The Council is losing members while we're gaining them. They're panicking. Let them panic, Helen said. We didn't build this to compete with them. We built it because it's what we needed. If other species find value in what we created, that's their choice. The galaxy is changing whether the Council likes it or not. Years passed. The Free Systems Compact continued to grow while the Council struggled to maintain relevance. Trade routes shifted. New alliances formed. The galaxy slowly reorganized itself around the reality that the Council was no longer the supreme authority. Humanity never sought to replace them, never tried to become the dominant power. They simply existed as an alternative, and that was enough. Jake Morrison eventually retired to New Terra, one of the first colonies established after humanity was banned from Council space. He built a small house near the ocean and spent his days reading and watching the sunset. His granddaughter, a bright girl of 8 years old, often visited him there. One evening, she sat beside him on the porch and asked, "Grandpa, are you sad about what happened with the Council?" Jake looked at her and smiled. Not even a little bit. But they were mean to you. They said humans were bad. They did, Jake agreed. But you know what? They tried to bury us. They thought banning us from their space would destroy us or contain us. They didn't realize they were planting seeds. Everything humanity has become, everything we've built, it happened because they pushed us away. They made us stronger by trying to make us weaker. His granddaughter thought about that for a moment. So it's good they were mean? No, Jake said. What they did was wrong. But we made something good come from it anyway. That's what humans do. We adapt. We survive, we grow. Nobody gets to tell us who we are or what we can become. We decide that for ourselves. The sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in colors that reminded Jake of Earth. Somewhere out in the galaxy, the Council was holding meetings and passing regulations and trying to maintain order. Somewhere else, the Free Systems Compact was building new colonies and making new friends and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Both would continue existing, sometimes working together, sometimes working separately, but always moving forward. Humanity had risen stronger than ever, not because they sought revenge or dominance, but because they refused to let anyone else define their limits. That was the real lesson the Council never learned. You cannot contain the human spirit. You can only choose whether to work with it or against it. The Council had chosen against, and humanity had simply moved on without them.
In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.